The families of Assad's friends joined the fight, each taking up the cause in their respective countries, reaching out to officials, diplomats, and the media to tell their children's side of the story. The fight for justice had begun, but they knew it would be a long and grueling journey. The families and friends of Assad and his companions prepare for the battles ahead. They brace themselves for what may come, but they remain united in their love, their determination, and their unwavering belief in the innocence of their loved ones. Episode 7. The Struggle for Justice. After receiving news of the arrest of their children, the parents of Assad, Mafroor, Tarab, and Khalid wasted no time in coming to Pakistan. Their hearts weighed down with worry, yet fueled by determination, they set out to prove the innocence of their children, who had come to Pakistan as tourists only to be falsely accused of terrorism. Once they arrived, they were confronted by an unyielding legal system that appeared determined to paint their children in the worst possible light. The accusations were severe, and the government's position was unbending. The parents' first task was to secure the best legal representation available. They turned to Noman, one of Pakistan's most respected attorneys, who was known for taking on cases others wouldn't touch. However, Noman quickly encountered his first major obstacle. Since it was classified as a high-profile terrorism case, the court denied the parents' petition to meet with their children. This was an unbearable blow to the parents, who had traveled across the world, hoping to see their children's faces and reassure them of their support. Now, even this simple gesture was out of reach. The family's next step was to file a bail hearing. Noman submitted the petition, confident that bail would be granted on the basis of insufficient evidence. However, the court denied the motion, citing that the prosecution had a 90-day period to examine all evidence, conduct discovery, and question potential witnesses. And, even worse, the government prosecutor had the right to request an additional 90-day extension if needed. This meant that the families had no choice but to wait, their hopes for a swift resolution crushed by the grim reality of the legal process. The news and rising tensions. During this waiting period, Noman shared a distressing insight with Assad's father, Mr. Ali. He explained that given the political climate, there was significant pressure on the judiciary to make examples out of anyone associated with opposition groups. Noman suspected that this case was part of a broader strategy to discredit the PTI, Pakistan True Identity, party by linking it to violence and extremism. He suspected that powerful figures were stirring unrest by planting troublemakers in peaceful rallies to paint the PTI in a negative light. In this environment, Noman warned, innocent people can easily become scapegoats. Assad's father listened, horrified at the political games being played, games that had ensnared his son. He was convinced of his son's innocence, repeating, "My boy would never be involved in something like this." He came to Pakistan to reconnect with his roots, not to be dragged into politics. Noman understood Mr. Ali's frustration. Unfortunately, he explained, the judiciary and the government prosecutor are under immense pressure. Whoever orchestrated this setup might not have realized your kids were foreigners, with no ties to PTI or any other political group. But now, they're just part of a wider strategy to discourage opposition. Noman assured the families that he would do everything he could, but the situation was volatile, and he would need to be prepared for every eventuality. To make matters worse, the prosecutor wasn't sharing any case details with the defense. Without discovery or access to their children, the families felt helpless, caught in a web of political maneuvering and bureaucracy. The families plead to their governments. Meanwhile, the news of the arrests had gone viral, spreading across international media and social platforms. The images and videos of the CIA agents pulling explosives from Assad and Mafroor's bags were broadcast worldwide. Even though the families knew these charges were unfounded, the media storm added to their stress. Determined to find justice, the families of the accused turned to their respective governments. They met with officials in the United States, Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom, pleading with them to review their children's cases. They explained that the four friends had never met in person before this trip. They were simply social media acquaintances with a shared interest in exploring Pakistan. To support their claim, the families voluntarily provided access to their children's computers, online histories, and social media accounts. They hoped this transparency would prove that their children's connection was harmless, nothing more than a group of young people united by curiosity. The intelligence agencies from the respective countries launched an independent investigation. Their findings suggested that the case had elements of entrapment, an orchestrated setup with the sole purpose of making peaceful protesters look like violent agitators. Armed with this evidence, these governments pressured the Pakistani authorities, requesting that they abandon any plans to extend the 90-day hold without bail. The mounting international scrutiny was impossible to ignore. A small victory in the courtroom. At the end of the initial 90-day period, the prosecutor predictably filed for another 90-day extension, arguing that the high-profile nature of the case required a thorough investigation. However, with pressure from international governments, the judge denied the extension request and set a date for a bail hearing. The families, exhausted but hopeful, gathered at the courthouse with Noman, praying that this would be the beginning of the end of their nightmare. But Assad, Mansour, Tarab, and Caleb were in no shape to celebrate. During the 90-day detainment, they had been subjected to brutal interrogation tactics, including beatings and even electric shocks. The authorities were relentless, demanding confessions to crimes they hadn't committed. The physical and emotional abuse left the friends battered, bruised, and traumatized, their faces swollen and covered in injuries. Despite this, Noman and the families were determined to proceed. However, the government's legal team filed a motion to prevent the four defendants from appearing in court, citing security concerns. The judge, appointed by the government, granted the request, ruling that the hearing would proceed without the accused present. The families were devastated. Not only had they been denied visitation rights, but now they couldn't even see their children in court. Government propaganda and media manipulation. Meanwhile, the Pakistani media, heavily influenced by the government, continued its campaign to portray Assad and his friends as PTI-affiliated extremists. Headlines were sensationalized, with phrases like "foreigners plotting terror in the heart of Pakistan" plastered across every major news outlet. News anchors repeated these unverified claims, further reinforcing the public's perception that the four friends were dangerous criminals. The government's strategy was clear: turn public opinion against them to pressure the judiciary into denying any possibility of bail. Noman saw through the deception and understood that the government was using every tool at its disposal to maintain control over the narrative. In truth, the authorities knew that the four friends were innocent, but admitting that publicly would mean acknowledging the existence of corrupt political schemes. Determined not to let the false narrative go unchallenged, Noman prepared his arguments carefully. His strategy was to reveal the true story, how these four strangers had connected on Facebook, inspired by Assad's call to explore his homeland, and had come to Pakistan with open hearts and good intentions. The bail hearing. On the day of the bail hearing, the courtroom was filled with tension. Noman took his position, ready to argue on behalf of Assad and his friends. He began by laying out the facts, how these four individuals, all from different countries, had connected through social media and decided to meet in Pakistan. He emphasized that they had no connections to PTI or any political organizations. These young people came to Pakistan to experience its culture and natural beauty, Noman declared. The idea that they would be involved in a terrorist plot is both preposterous and a miscarriage of justice. He proceeded to outline each of their backgrounds, describing how Assad had returned to Pakistan for the first time in 2 decades, hoping to reconnect with his heritage. Mansour, Tarab, and Caleb, who had never even visited Pakistan before, had come purely out of curiosity and respect for Assad's invitation. Noman argued passionately, painting a picture of innocent young people caught up in a dangerous web. When the government's attorney took the floor, his arguments were alarmingly aggressive. He claimed that the group's story of meeting through Facebook was an elaborate lie intended to cover up a deeper conspiracy. He alleged, without evidence, that one of the four had already confessed, though no such confession existed. Granting bail would present a serious flight risk, the prosecutor argued, casting doubt on the group's intentions. The families watched in horror as the government's attorney wove a tale of deception, painting their children as dangerous and duplicitous. When he finished, the The judge, who was rumored to be aligned with government interests, seemed unswayed by Nauman's heartfelt defense. The judge denied bail, granting the government another 90 days to build their case. The families were devastated. Their children, already suffering physically and mentally, would remain in detention without any hope of reprieve. The prosecutor requested that during this additional 90-day period, CIA agents be given free rein to interrogate the accused without interference from their attorneys. The judge agreed, further limiting Nauman's ability to defend his clients. Nauman knew the prosecutor's real intention. He wanted to isolate the defendants, denying them access to counsel and using harsh interrogation techniques to force confessions. This was not about justice. It was about setting an example, quelling dissent, and reinforcing a narrative of control. A relentless fight for freedom. The families returned home, hearts heavy with despair, but not defeated. They knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but they also knew they had no choice but to press on. Assad's father, Mr. Ali, organized meetings with journalists and human rights organizations, hoping to bring international attention to the case. He vowed not to rest until his son and his friends were free, no matter how long it took. Meanwhile, Nauman continued his efforts, working tirelessly to gather evidence, compile witness testimonies, and expose the truth of the government's motives. He filed complaints about the treatment of the defendants, alleging human rights abuses and arguing that the prolonged interrogation without counsel amounted to torture. In the days that followed, the families and supporters of the accused did everything in their power to challenge the system. They held protests, connected with activists, and utilized every available channel to shed light on the injustice their children were facing. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but they would not back down. As the days turned into weeks, the media began to cover the family's perspective, creating a groundswell of support and sympathy. People from all walks of life began to speak out, recognizing that this case represented something far greater than a few young tourists. It was a battle for truth and integrity in a system that seemed to have lost its way. For Assad, Mansour, Tarab, and Khalib, each day in prison was a reminder of the sacrifices their families were making for them. They remained resilient, drawing strength from the knowledge that they were not alone. Their fight was not over, and with their families and attorney Nauman by their side, they held on to the hope that justice would ultimately prevail. This is a challenging and sensitive story involving political pressures, human rights abuses, and the moral dilemmas faced by individuals within a flawed justice system. Episode 8. Shadows of Injustice. Mounting international pressure. As the 90-day extension neared its end, international attention on the case grew stronger. The families of Assad, Mansour, Tarab, and Khalib continued to push their governments to intervene. Officials from the United States, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom pressed Pakistani authorities to ensure that the accused were given a fair trial. High-ranking diplomats from each country met with Pakistani government officials, emphasizing the rights of the young men and demanding that they receive transparent legal representation. Despite the mounting pressure, the Pakistani government remained unmoved, citing the charges of terrorism as grounds for limited cooperation. The case was too politically charged, and with public sentiment turning increasingly hostile, Pakistani officials showed little interest in cooperating with foreign authorities. Instead, they doubled down on their stance, issuing statements that the trial would proceed according to Pakistani law. Second bail hearing and media frenzy. The second bail hearing arrived, and attorney Nauman appeared in court with renewed hope. He had prepared his arguments meticulously, hoping the evidence would expose the flaws in the prosecution's case. However, as the hearing proceeded, it became clear that the government was not ready to relent. The prosecution argued that the accused posed a significant flight risk and presented documents purportedly showing confessions from the defendants. The court accepted these documents as valid evidence, and to Nauman's shock, the judge denied bail again, stating that all four defendants had supposedly accepted their involvement in the alleged terror plot. Nauman was outraged, aware that the confessions were likely obtained through coercion. But without access to his clients and with no way to verify their statements, his arguments fell flat. News of the denied bail hearing spread rapidly. Media outlets across Pakistan broadcast the story, painting the defendants as foreign terrorists who had infiltrated the country to incite violence. Talk show hosts and public figures fueled the narrative, condemning the young men and calling for swift justice. Pakistan's public, already divided and growing increasingly wary of PTI, began to rally behind the government, seeing this case as a way to curb political instability. Public sentiment had shifted so significantly that even PTI supporters began withdrawing their support for the party, fearful of being associated with alleged terrorists.